Will the Damascus prophecy in Isaiah 17 be used to bring on the Antichrist Peace Covenant? If you're unfamiliar with the Damascus prophecy of Isaiah 17:1, it's that the city of Damascus, 2 million people in that city, will cease to exist as a city from that day on. So this is a pretty big deal. Is this possible that this will happen in the near future? And we're going to talk about all that today. So is the UN, the United Nations, hoping to broker the Antichrist Peace Covenant using the Israel-Hamas war as an excuse to get it passed? And will the Damascus prophecy of Isaiah 17 be involved? Something in this channel that we have never taught about before. Is that prophecy finally about to be fulfilled? It's hard to believe that just 1 month ago, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stood before the United Nations General Assembly and proclaimed a new era of peace was about to dawn. Do you remember that? Fast forward to this week, when UN Secretary General Guterres condemned Israel as the cause of Hamas's terrorist actions.
Excellencies, it is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing.
So Guterres said there was a lot behind Hamas's attack, primarily Israel's occupation. It's hard to occupy your own country, but I digress. But how about a peace deal that was about to work? Could that have been a cause? It's one that the globalists wanted to be stopped, obviously. Guterres never mentioned that. Israel's UN ambassador, Gilead Erdogan, accused the Secretary General of having lost, quote, all morality and impartiality, end of quote, and called for his resignation. Guterres just laughed it off. Imagine having this guy Guterres be the one overseeing the peace process, because that's what the UN would like. So where is all this going? Why are we talking about the UN when this video is actually about the Damascus prophecy? Well, you've probably heard me say this in the past, especially in the past 2 months, that the main thing is always the main thing. As horrific as the last month in the Middle East has been, it isn't the main thing. The main thing the globalists want, and probably Satan wants, is the Antichrist Peace Covenant, which will start the final 7 years of the tribulation. They want this because it will rewrite everything. The UN Charter. It will eliminate nation-state sovereignty and place the United Nations and the World Court in charge of everything. They will likely say this is going to be necessary to keep the peace and to control situations like what's happening in the Middle East right now. On this same day now that the UN was meeting, we're going back to what Guterres had to say, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a UN international coalition or peacekeeping force to occupy Gaza. And in our opinion, if this takes place, it will mean occupying Israel as well. That's something for us to keep in mind, because it looks like the main thing is the main thing. And that's why they're preaching that only a peace deal of their making is going to work. And by that they mean a UN peace deal, not one that Israel would work out on its own. And that's how the Damascus prophecy is going to fit into all this. And you'll see that in just a second or two. Now, obviously, the globalists are using the situation in the Middle East to their advantage. But a real question you might ask is, was this war actually started in order to make the world believe an Antichrist peace deal is needed? Are the world protests that are popping up everywhere organized to accelerate that same idea? One of the most interesting propaganda aspects, by the way, that I've seen is the distribution of videos supposedly portraying an Israeli air assault that actually turned out to have been extracted from a video game, noticeably Arma 3. But I digress, because today we're looking into all these things in more depth. If the main thing, getting the peace deal in place, is the main thing, then we should view all events that could lead to it with suspicion, especially because peace seemed within Israel's grasp just 2 weeks prior to Hamas's brutal attack. Was the attack purposeful so that the solution had to be the solution that the UN and the globalists desire, not the best solution? Was the brutality of the attack also intentional to force Israel into forceful retaliation and the escalation of everything that we've seen in the Middle East, leading to the possible eventual fulfillment of Isaiah 17 and the Damascus Prophecy? So far, every part of this, from the attack, ending Israel's effort for peace, to Israel's retaliation, to the worldwide protests, they all seem to fit into making the UN's plan for September 2024 a reality. We can't prove this, but it seems like a perfect scenario for the UN. Either they fell into it or they caused it. October 7th was the second biggest terrorist attack of all time. I don't know if you knew that. 9/11 was the biggest. And guess what? Immediately prior to that attack, back in 2001, Israel and the Palestinians were working on the Camp David II peace accords. We are told that they had worked out all the details on September 10th, 2001. And the very next day, you know what happened, 9/11. So there's a history of major terrorist attacks breaking up peace accords, at least peace accords that didn't match the type of peace plan the globalists want, one the UN controls. That's something to just keep in the back of your mind. But before we discuss this further, first a shout out to our community member, Jason Lawrence, who helped research this very important topic for us. So let's start with what the Bible says about the peace covenant in Daniel 9:27. He will make a strong covenant with the many for 1 week being a week of years or 7 years. Notice it is a he that is responsible for the covenant. All of us should be watching for someone to come to the forefront and lead the peacekeeping effort, because many scholars believe this will be the Antichrist. Not all scholars, but many. So far, no one like this has become evident. However, the UN is planning the Summit for the Future in late September 2024. So we have 11 months for someone to rise to the forefront, and I recommend everyone listening to this video should be watching for this very closely. Now, as we continue to look at Daniel 9:27, let's next look at the word translated as make a strong, as in make a strong covenant. Notice I said the single word, because in Hebrew, this is one word, not three, gabar, and it actually means to strengthen, or it can mean empower, or it can mean enforce. It does not mean make a strong, as the ESV translates it. So he is either going to enforce a covenant on the many, or he is going to take an existing covenant and make it stronger. If he forces the covenant on the many, this seems to imply a covenant that many don't want. One that someone in the UN or working with the UN enforces. Let's look at Isaiah 28:14-15, which describes this covenant. Hear the word of the Lord, O you scoffers, you who rule in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death and with Hades, and we have an agreement. When the overwhelming whip passes through, it will not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and in falsehood we have taken shelter. So God is speaking to the leaders of the nation of Israel, who are going to place their trust in a bunch of lies and falsehoods. Let's look at one of these lies that's spouting already. Al-Maliki, the Palestinian representative to the UN, warned the UN that more attacks and killings and weapons and alliances won't make Israel safer. Quote, only peace will, end of quote. I might add a false peace, a covenant with death and Hades, which means the grave. This is what Macron was preaching about as well, as we discussed earlier, letting the UN peacekeeping forces control matters in the Middle East. And when in the end times do death and Hades reappear, the ones the covenant is made with? At the fourth seal, in Revelation 6, 7 through 8. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider was named Death, and Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with famine and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So the same Death and Hades that Israel makes an agreement with are going to resurface at the fourth seal. That is where this whole thing is going. In Isaiah 28:18, we see what the result on Israel is of this covenant. Then your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Hades will not stand. When the overwhelming whip passes through, you will be beaten down by it. So the agreement or covenant is going to break down at the midpoint of the tribulation, resulting in extreme loss of life. But how do we go from where we are now to where this covenant will be needed? And how will it get everyone wanting this covenant with the many that really no one wants right now except the globalists? Well, something horrible likely has to happen, something that will make everyone long for peace, for a peace covenant. I would like to suggest that even the current war in the Middle East is not enough, but it is possible that the Damascus prophecy of Isaiah 17 will be involved. If that happens, most people will want the covenant with the many. This channel has never taught about the Damascus prophecy before. Part of the reason is our advisory team and I don't know when this is going to take place based on Scripture, and frankly, we're only surmising that this might be the time, but it fits perfectly with what is happening now and could happen in the future, namely September 2024 and the covenant. In Isaiah 17, the prophet prophesies that Damascus and several other cities nearby will be destroyed. Behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. The cities of Aroer are deserted. Isaiah 17:1. Damascus is a city of 2 million people and 40 square miles. Making this no longer a city is a very big deal. And 2 other cities are deserted, the cities of Aroer. Some think this should be translated as ruined cities, and the name probably stands as a representation of 2 towns in the Damascus region. Another possible translation is a town by the brink, or in other words, towns on the edge of the destruction. So how would this happen? Let's keep looking. And in that day, the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean. Gleanings will be left in it, as when an olive tree is beaten 2 or 3 berries in the top of the highest bough. Isaiah 17:3-6. So at that time, Israel or Jacob will be brought low, and only a few surviving. And where does it lead? Listen to this. The roar of nations. They will roar like mighty waters. The nations roar like the roaring of many waters. Isaiah 17:12. Does this sound like Psalm 2:1? Why do the nations rage? So they roar, they rage. So let's look at all the clues together and try to figure this out. Israel is brought low with only a few survivors. Then Damascus is destroyed as a city, and the nations rage. Let's imagine, as we look at this, that it could be a current event, that this could be happening, maybe within the next year. As you may know, Syria is a depository of chemical weapons. Their leader, Assad, used them on his own people. Would he refrain from using them on Israel if Israel were seriously defeating Hezbollah and Syria in the very near future, like in the next couple months? I imagine he might. So the first part of our thought on this is that the current conflict could extend to the north and that Israel begins to win. Desperate, Assad might use chemical weapons on Israel, probably shooting them in missiles, They have 150,000 missiles at the population centers of Israel. An absolutely horrible thing. What would Israel's reaction be to the use of weapons of mass destruction? I don't think I even have to ask, but let's look at what was said at the UN this week. In response to the UN's call for a ceasefire in the war, Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen said, "Tell me, what's the proportionate response for the killing of babies, for the rape of women, and burn them for beheading a child?" Cohen asked, "How can you agree to a ceasefire with someone who swore to kill and destroy your own existence?" He told the UN Security Council that the proportionate response to October 7th was a total destruction, to the last one, of Hamas, calling the extremist group the new Nazis. He stressed it is not only Israel's right to destroy Hamas, it is our duty. And he warned that today it is Israel and tomorrow Hamas, and the attackers will be at everyone's doorstep, starting with the West. What would be Israel's proportional response then to Syria shooting missiles loaded with chemical weapons at northern Israel using weapons of mass destruction? Would they use a limited nuclear warhead perhaps on Damascus? Israel calls this the Samson option, a deterrent strategy of massive retaliation with nuclear weapons as a last resort against a country whose military has invaded or destroyed much of Israel. They named this after Samson in the Bible, who pulled down the temple in Gaza on himself and on the Philistine rulers, killing them all. And what would the UN nations' response be to that, to a Samson option? They would rage, as per Psalm 2. They would roar, as per Isaiah 17, and be ready to do anything to avoid this type of problem in the future. They would agree to a covenant with the many, giving up their national sovereignty, and the globalists would have what they want, total control of the world. And the 70th week of Daniel would begin, and they would likely disarm Israel, forcing Israel to be a land of unwalled villages, defenseless and ready for Ezekiel 38 to take place. And I'm sure you know where those unwalled villages lead. I just said it. Click right here for the very next step in the prophetic puzzle, the Gog of Magog war. Find out where Magog is, who Gog is. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.